What's up, everybody? Two superpowers with enough nukes to end the world, never firing a shot at each other directly, while 100 new nations rip themselves free from empire. That's the second half of the 20th century. This is AP World Unit 8, the Cold War and Decolonization, and here's your map. Capitalism versus communism. Proxy wars from Korea to Cuba. Communism spreading through China and Cuba, and colonies across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East fighting their way to independence. Stick with me to the very end, and I'll show you the single fastest way to lock all of this in before exam day. Let's get into it. Start here. World War II ends, and two giants are left standing. The United States, capitalist and democratic, and the USSR, communist and authoritarian. They never fight each other head-on, so we call it the Cold War, a war of ideology, threats, and influence. They build rival alliances. NATO for the West, the Warsaw Pact for the Soviet bloc. The new United Nations tries to keep the peace. The College Board wants you to see this as a global contest between two visions of how to organize society. Now watch how hot that Cold War could get. Here's the genius and the horror of it. Instead of fighting directly, the superpowers fought through other countries, proxy wars. Korea split at the 38th parallel, communist north against capitalist south. Vietnam became a brutal war as the US tried to stop communism from spreading, the idea behind the domino theory. And in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world 13 days from nuclear war, when the Soviets put missiles in Cuba. Behind it all, an arms race and a space race, each side racing to outbuild and outlaunch the other. Easy exam points if you lock these in. This is the comparison the exam tests constantly, so lock it down. On one side, the United States, capitalism, free markets, democratic elections, leading NATO. On the other, the Soviet Union, communism, a state-controlled economy, one-party rule, leading the Warsaw Pact. Each one tried to pull newly independent nations into its camp with money, weapons, and ideology. But not everyone wanted to choose. Keep that in mind, because a whole block of nations refused to pick a side. Here's a piece students forget, and the College Board loves it. Not every country joined Team US or Team USSR. Newly independent nations like India, Egypt, and Indonesia formed the non-aligned movement, refusing to formally side with either superpower. Leaders met at the Bandung Conference in 1955 to push for independence, cooperation, and an end to colonialism. They wanted development on their own terms, not as pawns in someone else's rivalry. Remember this. The Cold War wasn't just two sides. Now follow communism as it spreads. Now the biggest communist victory of all. In 1949, after a long civil war, Mao Zedong's communists won control of China and founded the People's Republic. Mao launched the Great Leap Forward to rapidly industrialize, but it caused a catastrophic famine that killed tens of millions. Then came the Cultural Revolution, where Mao purged rivals and intellectuals to enforce communist loyalty. For the exam, know the pattern. Massive state-driven change, enormous human cost. And China wasn't the only revolution. Look 90 miles off Florida. In 1959, Fidel Castro led a revolution that overthrew Cuba's US-backed dictator and turned Cuba communist, right in America's backyard. Castro allied with the Soviet Union, which terrified the United States, and set up that Cuban Missile Crisis we talked about. This is the College Board's favorite point. Communism wasn't just a European or Asian story, it spread to Latin America too. So the map of communism stretches from the USSR, to China, to Cuba. Now pivot to the other huge force of this era, the end of empire. Here's the headline of decolonization. After World War II weakened Europe, colonies demanded freedom. In India, Mohandas Gandhi led a mass movement using non-violent resistance, boycotts, marches, and civil disobedience to pressure Britain. It worked. India won independence in 1947, but freedom came with a tragedy. The land was partitioned into two states, India and Pakistan, splitting Hindus and Muslims, and the partition triggered massive violence and one of the largest migrations in history. Non-violence won the freedom, partition showed the cost. Now cross to Africa. Let me give you the big pattern, because the exam wants the sequence. Step 1. World War II drains the European empires of money and legitimacy. Step 2. Colonized peoples, having fought and sacrificed, demand self-rule. Step 3. Independence comes two ways, negotiated and peaceful, like Ghana, or through armed struggle, like Algeria's brutal war against France. Step 4. Dozens of new nations are born across Asia and Africa. Track that chain, and you can explain the whole collapse of empire in one breath. Zoom into Africa, and the College Board wants you to compare two paths. In Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah led a largely peaceful, negotiated independence in 1957, the first sub-Saharan colony to break free, inspiring the whole continent. In Algeria, independence came the hard way, a long and violent war against France that finally won freedom in 1962. Same goal, two very different roads, negotiation versus arms struggle. That negotiated versus violent contrast is a classic comparison point. Now turn to the Middle East. In the Middle East, decolonization took its own explosive shape. In 1948, after the British left, the State of Israel was created as a homeland for Jewish people, many of them survivors of the Holocaust. But the same land was home to Palestinian Arabs, and the creation of Israel sparked conflict and war with neighboring Arab states, conflict that continues today. For the exam, see it as part of the bigger story. As empires withdrew, new nations and bitter disputes filled the vacuum. Now think about what life was like for all these brand new states. Freedom was just the start. Newly independent nations faced brutal challenges, drawing economies built to serve colonizers, borders that ignored ethnic lines, and pressure to pick a Cold War side. Some chose capitalist development, some chose communist or socialist models, some stayed non-aligned. And as empires ended, people migrated in huge numbers, often to the very countries that had colonized them, reshaping cities like London and Paris. But the darkest legacy of this century was something even worse. Brace yourself. The 20th century saw mass atrocity on a horrifying scale, and the exam expects you to know it. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge under Pol Pot murdered roughly 2 million people in the 1970s. In Rwanda in 1994, ethnic genocide killed around 800,000 in just months. These weren't random, they grew from political extremism, ethnic division, and the chaos of new and unstable states. The College Board wants you to recognize genocide as a tragic theme of the modern era. Now let's bring it all home. And that's AP, World Unit 8. The Cold War of Capitalism versus Communism, NATO versus the Warsaw Pact, proxy wars from Korea to Cuba, communism spreading through Mao's China and Castro's Cuba, decolonization from Gandhi's India to Ghana, Algeria, and Israel, and the dark scar of genocide. You just covered how the Cold War and the end of empire redrew the entire global map. But here's the truth. Watching is not the same as knowing. Head to AIM5 and practice Unit 8 for free, with instant feedback on every question. Links below. Now go get that 5, and I'll see you in Unit 9.